Michelle here. Lovely. Michelle is welcome as well. So I'll keep an eye on welcoming everybody. I'm so delighted to welcome tonight Professor Jane Osgood. Jane is a professor in the Centre for Education, Research and Scholarship in the University of Middlesex in the UK. We are so thrilled to have her with us tonight as our guest speaker and our fireside chat person. So Jane, according to her biography, and we know her work very well, she's very interested in a critical engagement with policy and curricular frameworks and pedagogical approaches to early child care, education and care. But I know from what I'm going to hear from her tonight, what she's saying will apply right across the education sectors. I've no doubt of that. And she has a particular interest in the creative and the effective and affectivity. And that's one of the areas we're very interested in. We formed the special interest group on that interest we have together in humanizing education, keeping the political and the critical part of it in there as well as the care and the affectivity. Kind of the bird never flew, they say, on one wing. So you need the tough and the tender, you need the care and you need the critical to be going together. And we have to rethink how education is, because we regard it as having been, I suppose, disappointing would be a gentle way of saying it, because it's all assumed at the moment to be so easily predictable and all that. So yeah, we're delighted to welcome all of you. I'm going to turn to Dawn Murphy before I go to our guest speaker, and maybe Dawn, you'd like to say a word of welcome to Jane as well.
Jane, I'm delighted you joined us this evening. I first came across your work when I was doing my own PhD, looking at the professionalisation of early childhood in Ireland, and I was really struck, I suppose, things that had irritated me with early childhood and professionalisation, but that I couldn't really explain why. And then I was reading about a deficit discourse and multiple understandings of professionalisation, and I seized on it and I thought, that's it. That's what I've been trying to say. And I suppose now I'm lecturing in early childhood and I teach on all the professional practice modules. So I'm still drawing on your work very much.
Yeah, lovely. Thanks, Dawn. So Jane, if you're happy, we'll be guided by you. You were saying you had a few slides, whatever you'd like to chat to us, 20 minutes, 25, whatever you like, and then we can open it to whoever has attended, and we have a lovely, nice bit of attendance here already, so we can open it up for comments or questions or whatever. So you're very welcome, Jane. Would you like to tell us how you plan to do the fireside chat with us?
Yeah, well, firstly, thank you so much for the invitation, and thank you for being here at this time of day. I had in mind that I've got a set of slides, and that kind of keeps me on track, because I do have a tendency to kind of wander and meander and go off piste. So I think that would probably take, I don't know, 20, 25, 30, I don't know.
That works lovely for us. And I forgot to say, you're also a former editor of the journal Gender and Education as well.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's enough of me. I'm going to go on mute now and let you take over there.
Okay, great, thank you. So I don't know if you've all had a chance to look at the abstract that accompanies this session, but what I'm presenting to you today is some current work that I'm literally up to my neck in. It doesn't seem to stop, and it's a wonderful place to be stuck, actually. So it's a pilot project that we've been undertaking in reception classes, and it's loosely environmental education, but as I will go on to explain, it's a lot more than that. And we started to write from the project now and to theorise from the project, and we're on our 4th academic publication, and we've got a book contract with Springer Nature. So there's lots to think and lots to write about. So I'm just going to share with you a paper that has been published. No, it hasn't actually. It's at the proof stage. It will be published imminently. And we're playing with some theoretical concepts and trying to get to think about what happens in reception classes and how we conceptualize the child, particularly 4-year-olds, and particularly those 4-year-olds who are deemed to be the COVID generation and framed in deficit discourses as suffering from learning loss and not woefully unschool ready because they've been locked at home with their families and carers during the pandemic lockdown. So we're trying to explore what happens if you kind of push aside the straitjacket of primary education, early childhood education, and you create space for a bit of chaos and creativity and exploration and experimentation and fun. And yeah, so let me share my slides and I'll get started. If I'm going too fast, if it doesn't make sense, if you want to jump in, that's absolutely fine. But otherwise I'll just steam on. Okay, can you all see that? Yeah, okay.
Yes, we can.
Brilliant. Okay, so a rather long, elaborate title about worlding and childhood and multi-species flourishing. What we're trying to get at with these terms is partly the conceptual framing of the project, and the influence of Donna Haraway on what we're doing, but also the idea multi-species flourishing replaces environmental education or sustainability education, because it's not about teaching children facts or a moral duty to take care of the environment, but to think about how they can flourish with other species, so hence the multi-species flourishing. So what I want to do is to share with you the idea, the proposition that playful approaches in childhood research can act as subversive forms of refusal. Okay, so and in order to do that, I'm going to offer some insights from this current research project, which is reassuringly has the title Mini Beasts. We all recognise Mini Beasts in early childhood. So Mini Beasts of Barnet is the project, but it then became Making Oddkin, which again is kind of a Haraway influence. But essentially what we're doing is troubling the idea of environmental sustainability. Whose environment? What environment? Is environmental education only ever happening in nature? Is it only ever happening in the countryside? And so this piece of research was undertaken in a London borough. So not nature, not the countryside, but there was an awful lot of multi-species flourishing going on, and we wanted to kind of tap into where that bubbled up. So as I say, it was really working with 4-year-olds in their classrooms with their teachers, with their teaching assistants, and we had some contact with parents and the local community. But our ultimate game was to playfully pursue less human-centric narratives concerning how we live together on a dying planet. And that's a bit gloomy, but you know, that's essentially what we're doing. So as I say, the project's indebted to Donna Haraway, and particularly her idea and practice of serious play. And this is an opportunity to get kind of caught up in the knots and tangles of life in the Anthropocene. And crucially, it's about not having a clear direction in mind or prescribed outcomes or a firm agenda, but just kind of jumping in at the middle and seeing what comes up and what you can do with what comes up. And as you can imagine, with 124-year-olds, this became quite chaotic, quite wild at times, and it generated acute discomfort for the adults, so for the teachers and the teaching assistants who were caught up in this praxis. So there were 3 of us, 3 researchers that went into schools. And so we were kind of leading it, but the teachers were there and the teaching assistants were there, and they were agog some of the time at the madness that was unfurling, but they stuck with it. They were open, which was crucial actually, that they would be open and allow us to create this chaos. So really it's about reconfiguring research as inherently playful, if you allow it to be, but it's also serious and nonsensical, and it's not the exclusive preserve of children. You know, play is assumed to be something children do, but actually researchers and teachers and parents, you know, we can do it too. And we can do it through things that are seen to be serious, like research and teaching. So we work with two American scholars, Harney and Motton, and I'm not going to go into too much detail about it. You can read the full paper if you want to, but they invite us to join what they term the undercommons. And the undercommons is kind of characterized by open-ended, exploratory, playful encounters that have capacities to turn attention to mechanisms of control, which we know education are subjected to, that often regulate and govern body minds, and also highlight the activist potential for play to reach other ways of being, seeing, and relating. So it's a coming together of these two things. So the project itself, I'll just play this very short video about, this is the kind of the official line of what the project's about, if it works, but maybe it doesn't. No, it doesn't. Okay, so really it's a very local project. It's in the London Borough of Barnet, which is where Middlesex University is located. And it's really about flipping the narrative about how we engage with young children in terms of environmental education, sustainability education. As I say, it's about seeing children as knowers, as doers, as co-collaborators, working with us as equals in a project where it's not possible to get things wrong. We're not interested in science fact. We're not interested in what these children know and the learning they can demonstrate. We're interested in sparking their curiosity. We're interested in having them think more deeply through embodied encounters with small creatures, from microbes all the way up to caterpillars and worms and snails and slugs. And to get their hands dirty and to really immerse themselves in what it is to be part of an ecosystem. This is a map of Barnet, the borough, and then there's an image at the top of a high street. So it's renowned for being quite a leafy green borough, but it is still very urban / suburban, and it is a densely populated area of London. So the idea, you know, already we're starting to pull apart the concept of nature, of what counts as environment, in terms of, you know, sustainability and learning with creatures. So this has been written about extensively by others, that, you know, nature doesn't only happen in rural contexts, it can happen in urban contexts too. So that was quite important. And so this, this paper that I'm sharing with you, as I say, is soon to be published, and I can share it with you. I think it's on academia.edu, so if you want to read the fuller version you can, but really it's about thinking about play, or rethinking play, through this post-developmental lens. And as you probably all know, well, we're all shaped by developmentalism. There's this idea that there's linear progress. You start here and you move through ages, stages, steps of mastery from one to the next to the next. But what happens if you don't conceive of children that way? What happens if you don't conceive of learning or research or play in those developmental ways? So that's some of what we're doing, is kind of disrupting the logic that underpins the way that we understand children, and therefore the expectations that we have of them. Okay, so this is the classroom in Hedgehog Class, where one of the schools so we worked intensely with 2 reception classes in 2 primary schools in the London Borough of Barnet. We also worked across the entire year group. The schools were really quite keen that we be as inclusive as possible, but we also wanted to do some very in-depth work with a smaller group of children. As I say, there were 3 of us and there were 30 of them. There was a teacher in the class and at least, I would say, at least 3 or 4 teaching assistants. And this is because of the supposed rise in special educational needs that we see with the COVID generation. Most of these children were yet to be statemented or diagnosed with anything official, but they were really, really struggling with classroom. And what they were really struggling with was this grid. So this carpet is carpet time in the nursery, and children spend a huge amount of their time. They're designated a square, they're designated a dot. That's where they are expected to sit. For a lot of the pedagogy that goes on in reception. So these are 4-year-old children that squiggle and squirm and really, really struggle with this, some more than others. And so this particular scene, this particular picture has haunted me because it just is really problematic. And but it does serve a purpose. You know, teachers this is useful if you want to have the children in one space at one time and you want to convey some messages, then this serves that purpose. But it's also really, really difficult, really challenging. And what I love about it is if you have a look at the masking tape that's been stuck down, as the weeks went by, this started to disintegrate. And it wasn't just disintegrating because of small feet walking across the carpet, it was because it was picked away. And so you already start to see this refusal, this playful refusal of the 4-year-olds, like, yes, fine, there's a dot and a square, but I'm going to pick away at this, gently pick away at it. And so, you know, this seemed to be the ongoing thing was the regulation of bodies and minds. And what we were really keen to do through our project was to create, I guess, Harney and Motton's form of the undercommon, somewhere playful where the rules are bend and there's space for something else to emerge. And so we wanted to create a space where chaos wasn't seen as problematic, where the regulation of body minds was not the primary objective, but rather children were free to experience through their senses, through their bodies, through exploration, through experimentation, and through not knowing. And it was about this idea of getting lost and staying lost. And you will probably not be surprised to learn that the 4-year-olds did not have a problem with this. They were very open to, you know, so we introduced a series of activities, some that on the surface look quite familiar. So we took in a series of picture books, and the picture books that we chose were deliberately not anthropomorphizing creatures, mini beasts. So, you know, often, like, so if you think of the Julia Donaldson superworm, for example, they have boggly eyes and they have arms and legs and they look quite human. We wanted to try and get away from that. And we also wanted to get away from sort of moralizing agendas, and we wanted to have some troubling narratives and some fun narratives, but really to try and encounter mini beasts on their own terms, in their own habitats. And so, yeah, one of the books that we introduced was Min the Microbe. No, Don't Lick This Book. That's what the book is called, Don't Lick This Book. If you present such a book to 34-year-olds, they instantly want to lick the book. So you have them all running at you with their tongues hanging out. But anyway, the book itself follows Min the Microbe. She's the main protagonist. And the book plays with scale. It plays with pace and relationships and what microbes do. And quite quickly through the introduction of these picture books, children started to get really intrigued about the superpowers that small creatures have. So we went from sort of initial narrative of what would you do if you saw a spider, people saying, well, I'd stamp on it, or I'd have to throw it outside or whatever, to then slowly starting to see that actually spiders are quite remarkable. They have, you know, their silk is stronger than steel and it's incredibly flexible. So it was slowly but gently introducing these other ways of thinking about small creatures. And and how they are not like humans at all. They are very, very different, and it's about kind of valuing creatures on their own terms and in their own way of being in the world. So the fact that they, you know, eyesight is not the main way in which many small creatures find their way through the world. It's through sense or smell or vibration or whatever. And we started to play with that. So we invited the children to play with the vibration and to imagine moving like a spider or a worm or a woodlouse. And again, if you can kind of imagine 34-year-olds writhing across the floor worm-like, you have a little window into some of what was going on. And for teachers, this was like, oh, okay, but do we not need to regulate them? Do we not need to get them back on the carpet? Do we not need them back on their dots? Oh my God, this is just too much. So it was kind of staying with that too muchness and the overwhelm. So the other thing that we did was to think about what happens in childhood research typically is that we observe. We sit back. Well, it's quite hard to sit back because children are usually crawling all over you. But if they're not, then the idea is that you sit back and you have an observation schedule. You're in search of some evidence of something taking place, and you mark that down. And we wanted to disrupt this as well and say, actually, what if we're not doing that? What if we're not in search of the thing that we think we're looking for? What if we're open to the surprises, open to the chaos, open to the not knowing, and also shifting how we view children. So rather than being something to be observed and charted and understood and then probably fixed, because if they're falling short of what we're expecting to see, and that's the only thing we're in search of, then already you've got problems and you've got deficits. But we wanted to shift the focus. So we gave the children our photography equipment. And one thing was a small indestructible cube here. You can throw this. It's just a little, it's almost like a GoPro, but it's just a little cube, and you charge it up and you can throw it, you can spit on it, you can drop it in a puddle, you can stamp on it, and it's pretty much indestructible. And the children love this. And the other thing is the element of surprise. You don't know whether or not you've actually recorded anything on it. And you also don't know whether it's video or whether it's still. So this image here is these three children being taken by surprise. They were taking photos of mini beasts. We went out into the playground and they were searching for, and I should also say, because of the funding limitations for this project, we had to undertake the field work in February, which is not the best time of year to be searching for mini beasts. It's cold, it's wet. We had to abort mission a couple of times because of flood warnings. And yeah, our hands were blue, and most insects are actually sleeping, they're hibernating. So the creatures that we found were typically slugs, snails, worms, spiders, woodlouse, the unexciting ones. But actually, when we started to explore with the children what these creatures could do, all of a sudden they were blown away by the superpowers that a snail has when it changes sex halfway through its life, when it's you know, all the amazing that it has 20,000 teeth, that, you know, all the amazing things that snails can do and that snails are, that would have been overlooked had we stuck to the seasonal dictates of when you should be doing mini beasts. So just going back, you know, this was very much about the children genuinely being collaborators with us, and not in the sense of let's be our co-researcher, this is how to do research, but rather share our equipment and let's see what we find out together. And so that was the yeah, there was an element of surprise, and it was a lot of fun. And some of these children are those who are waiting to be statemented, and that's what we found, was that concern fell away because these children couldn't get it wrong, because there was no getting it right or getting it wrong. It was exploring and experimenting and just seeing what was there. And they were given responsibility, and they were, you know, in the thick of it. So that was really important. So we were sort of gently but significantly shifting, you know, whose knowledge counts, whose photos counts, what counts as data, what counts as research, and pushing at that. So you see here, you know, this is a child taking a photo of a child taking a photo of a slug. And if you can just imagine the euphoria around what was going on this cold February day at the discovery of a slug, it was, you would have imagined that an alien had just landed. It was quite extraordinary how much fun and how engaged they were. And then there's this, you know, so they had their camera, and there's me, the researcher, and they're actually documenting me. So it starts to flip all these kind of power hierarchies, and who's doing what, and whose vision, whose vantage point counts. And this was quite interesting, actually. So Harney and Motton talk about perpetual mediation, that we are endlessly caught back into this space of regulation of body minds. And I guess the gridded carpet is really symptomatic and emblematic of that. But there were other times and spaces and places where this kind of mediation kept surfacing. And this doll, this sort of germ-ridden, sodden, wet, mouldy, black and green doll was in the corner of the playground. And we were like, oh gosh, okay, they might have all sorts of mini beasts in there, some that we can't see, bacteria and microbes, and maybe there's a slug stuck to it, whatever. So I picked it up, and the children are, you know, surrounding me, absolutely transfixed by what this non-human entity might have to offer our investigation. And then there was a sort of bellowing across the playground, right, okay, put that back where you found it, go and wash your hands, you know, this is. So we were immediately kind of sucked back into this space of, it's dirty, it's germs, it's bad for you. And I'm not saying that that's right or wrong, but it's just, it was interesting how quickly we kind of flipped back into, so there was never an opportunity to think, oh, well, where might our investigations go if we were allowed to take the doll seriously, and everything that the doll harbored, and the role that the doll plays in environmental education, and thinking about weather systems and flood and so on and so on and so on. But this kind of perpetual mediation cuts that short. So that was quite interesting. And then one of the other things that was really important to the project is that, well, we've described it here as messmates and being in the thick of it. So there's me, and then my colleague, Victoria DeRiker, who is up there, and we are literally, we participate on the same level, in the same way, and with the children. It's exhausting. I do not have the energy of a 4-year-old, but you know, in order to, if what we say we're doing is flattening hierarchies, not just human hierarchies in terms of age and positions of power, but thinking about flattening multi-species hierarchies. So the slug is just as important as the cat, is just as important as the polar bear, is just, you know, you get the idea. So this was really central to our methodology, was that we should work to flatten these hierarchies whenever possible. So one of the other things that we did, as well as the choice of children's literature that wasn't cute or anthropomorphizing insects and small creatures, was to use documentary footage of insects. So not cartoons, but actually to look at insects in their own habitat behaving as insects. And that wasn't always innocent, it wasn't always pure and kind and lovely. And And then off the back of that, we then invited them to engage in these arts-based activities. And here is Mark making to jazz music, and they are marking like ants on hot sand. But there were a whole other bunch of arts-based activities, collaging, nonsense poetry, also we're busy writing about them all, and that's what will be in the book. But it really is this emphasis on being messmates and being in the thick of it with them, and engaging with this kind of open-ended exploration, and how that could shift our ideas about what children were capable of doing. And in another paper we've written about, again, how special educational needs surfaced. So there were a couple of children, but there's one in particular that I would say had kind of moderate autism, and they were very much part of the class, but also they were often scooped off by a teaching assistant when it got too much. And you would think that this kind of overwhelming, embodied, racing like spiders and writhing like worms and out in the elements with no clear direction would be overwhelming. In fact, it absolutely wasn't. It was the complete reverse. So when we undertook this exercise of mark making to music, the child with autism sat in the middle of the paper, and all the other children just marked around him, and he sat there, and just so he was included but not included. He wasn't participating in the same way that the other children were, but he was participating in the space, in the moment, in the activity. And that was a real revelation to us. And I think it's, when you start to break down some of the regulation and the perpetual mediation and the going back into the grids and the squares and the dots, then something else happens, which, as I say, we've written more extensively about in another paper, Thinking with Spiders and Spider Ethics. But the other thing was artful play and thinking about the nonsensical. Things don't have to be literal, they don't have to be representational, they can be playful. So one of the big things was to encourage them to think about fantastical mini beasts. So what superpower would the mini beast have? Where would it live? Who would its friends be? And initially that was quite hard. Even at 4, that kind of fantastical imagining is almost not acceptable. You've got to be literal, and you've got to demonstrate that you can count and that you're literate and you're numerate and you can do phonics and blah, blah, blah. So this was such a really kind of welcome antidote, I think. And when we interviewed the teachers after the project had finished, they were like, I had forgotten. And they were quite emotional, quite upset, tearful, and said, I had forgotten why I came into teaching. This is why I came into teaching, for the love of children and exploration and, learning together and having the space and opportunity for fun, which has all but dropped out the bottom of teaching. So yeah, it was very much about bringing the nonsensical through artful play. One of the other memorable things we did was to work with Spike Milligan's poetry, the ning nang nong, and words don't really have to make sense, and you can throw any word you like into the mix. And so you can imagine every 4-year-old said poo or some or fart or whatever. But then once they got past that, then the words that came out, the nonsense words, and that was really fun, because of course when it comes to being literate, you've got to have the right words. So they very quickly kind of got embraced that possibility. So yeah, it's really this. It's about, we write about this in the paper, and there's a lot of theory in the paper, but I'm not going to go into it here too much. But it's this idea of childing that is not the exclusive preserve of the child. So this is something that's been written about by David Kennedy and Walter Cohen. And everybody in the school community was embracing childing, kind of encountering the world through your senses, through a sense of playfulness, through constantly being in the middle. You know, it wasn't a case of mastery or demonstrating expertise for any of us, but it was really exciting and fun. I've already talked to you about this. So this is the nonsense poetry. And the other thing that we did was to put little words or sentences from post-humanist theorists. So we had some Haraway on the table, we had some Anna Zing, we had some Barad, and then we had these other words that they had come up with. And then they put them together and we started to make nonsense verse. And that was all, yeah, another act of refusal and fun, really. So this is this is when it all comes together, you know, so the idea of being outdoors but in an urban space, movement, the senses, togetherness, more about the process than the outcome. So those are the kind of priorities that are coming into play in this sort of research. And what I haven't said, actually, I'll stop sharing here. What I haven't said is that, and we kept it from them. The teachers knew, but the children didn't. That ultimately what we were seeking to do was to put together a children's book, and but with the children as the authors, the co-authors, the co-creators. And so every activity that we did contributed to the book in some way. So we documented it, as I say, they were documenting, so it was their photographs as well as our photographs. There was the artwork and the outputs from the artwork, the poetry, the language, the storytelling, all of the, and then other things like we made paper from scratch. So we went round and foraged in the playground. They picked up bits of rubbish on the way to school. We also went into the what it's called, the thing that shreds, the shredding machine in the teacher in the staff room, and it's full of curriculum documents. So that felt like a subversive act of refusal, where you start mashing it up how you should be doing phonics at a particular time of day, and the children should be on their dots and on their squares learning funny phonics. So we mashed that up with the mud and the sticks and whatever, and then we produced a book. And the book is their artwork. So this is the that's the sheet that they were making on. This is a collage of the fantastical mini beast that one of the children created. And then throughout the entire book, it's there. So this is groups of children dancing as spiders shrunk to the size of a spider. So when we gave them the book, they were like, oh my God, it's an insect. Oh, no, it's not. It's us. Oh my God, it's you. Look, we're spiders. And then it took them right back to the day that we'd spent moving like spiders. And so playing with scale again, you know, if you're talking about flattening hierarchies, then a group of children become the size of an ant. And then, yeah, so throughout is this book with their words, their artwork. And we took it back to the schools in the summer and launched the book. And it was a huge, and they all had their own copy. So the idea being that they can share it with their family and they'll have it as a kind of physical artifact of their engagement with life in the undercommons, albeit for one term only, but hopefully it lives on. So I'll stop there because you may well have lots of questions or just think that I'm completely bonkers or whatever. But anyway,
Yeah.
I'm completely open to however you want to take it.
Jane, thank you very much. I'll stop recording now if that's okay with everybody.